as if subtle signs were trying to awaken you from a long spiritual slumber. Perhaps what you call coincidence is, in fact, a coded invitation. Among all the symbols that cross the history of spirituality, few are as laden with mystery as the number 33. Associated with the age of Jesus at the time of his crucifixion, this number has been revered, feared, and hidden for centuries, not by chance. In various esoteric traditions, it represents the highest point of the spiritual ladder, the peak of an inner journey that transforms the ordinary human being into a channel of divine light. But what if Jesus' 33 years were not just chronological, but a hidden spiritual map in plain sight? In institutionalized Christianity, the narrative of Christ's life often boils down to miracles, crucifixion, and resurrection. But there is a less explored layer, where each step of his journey is a symbolic code, a hidden key to a process of enlightenment that can be experienced by any awakened human being. Jesus, as a universal archetype, did not come just to be worshipped. He came as a master of the way, a silent teacher for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Within each gesture, there is an unspoken lesson, and within each phase of his life, a step on the path back to the divine. The number 33 is revered by various spiritual traditions and occult schools. In Kabbalah, it appears as the degree of union between the higher and lower worlds. In Freemasonry, 33 is the highest degree of spiritual elevation. In the human body, there are 33 vertebrae that support the spine, the same spine through which the energy of the Kundalini rises in the Eastern tradition. It's not a coincidence, it's cosmic architecture. All of this points to the same principle, ascension. But the real question is, does the Book of the 33 Steps really exist? Something that, even without physical pages, is recorded in symbols, archetypes, and historical gestures, waiting to be decoded. If this book exists, it's not in a library, nor hidden in a scroll. It is printed in the life of a master, a spiritual roadmap lived in the flesh, a divine theater enacted to awaken humanity. The steps are not numbered, but they are there, veiled between parables and actions, revealed to those who have the courage to dig within themselves. The life of Jesus can be read as an external gospel, but also as an internal manual. An invitation to walk the same 33 steps that led him from incarnation to enlightenment. And this invitation, subtle and silent, still echoes for those who have the sensitivity to listen. Before any religion existed, there was the calling. The calling is that silent unrest, pulsing in the heart of those who feel that life cannot just be this. To be born, pay bills, repeat routines, and then die. Jesus answered this calling fully, and throughout his 33 years he showed us how to respond to this calling with courage, surrender, and presence. He did not promise ease. He offered truth, and the truth, for those who truly seek it, is a path that demands everything. That's why the map is not for everyone, only for those who accept losing the world to find their soul. The journey of the 33 steps begins in the innermost part of the being. It's not about geography, but about consciousness. The first step is the recognition that we are lost, not in the world, but from ourselves. Each of these steps requires a renunciation, an integration, and a revelation. Contrary to what many think, the spiritual path is not an escape from life, but a radical plunge into its essence. And Jesus, with his public and silent life, offered not dogmas, but demonstrations. He did not ask for worship. He asked us to follow him, not with our feet, but with our heart. The Book of 33 Steps can be interpreted as the invisible trail that leads from identification with the ego to the incarnation of the spirit. Each step is like a station of transformation. What separates us from a full and awakened life are not the external circumstances, but the internal veils, veils of fear, of attachment, of illusion. As we walk through each step, these veils fall away, until the true self, the one that is one with the whole, can emerge. Jesus did not come to create a religion. He came to remind us of our divine origin and guide us back to it. It's intriguing to realize that the crucifixion itself, the climax of the Christian drama, can be seen as the ultimate test, the moment of total surrender, not as defeat, but as liberation. When he says, "It is finished," it is not the end. It is the beginning of true life, now without ego, without fear, without separation. This is step 33, the point where consciousness no longer belongs to time, but merges with eternity. The cross, in this context, ceases to be an instrument of pain and becomes a bridge to infinity, an alchemical symbol where the human dissolves into the divine. That's why so many mystics throughout history have sought to live this map in silence. Francis of Assisi, Teresa d'Avila, Meister Eckhart, each in their own way walked the 33 steps, some consciously, others intuitively, but all arrived at the same point: union with the One. This journey is not limited to Christianity, but is inscribed in it with beauty and depth. Jesus is just one of the names that the light took to touch us, and the path he walked is universal, eternal, and available to all who truly desire to cross the abyss between the small self and the divine self. However, to tread this path, it requires more than just faith. It requires the willingness to die every day, to die to the roles, to the identities, to the fears, to die not as an end, but as a rebirth. Each step brings us closer to a fuller existence, where we no longer seek meaning, because life itself becomes the meaning. At this stage, the seeker stops seeking, for they become what they were seeking. The seed of enlightenment has always been within. The 33 steps are merely the process of germination. Upon understanding this, we realize that the call is individual, but the destination is collective. The more awakened individuals, the more humanity ascends. Jesus did not come to save individuals. He came to activate the Christ consciousness in all of us, a vibrational frequency, a living presence. When we say he lives in us, it's not a metaphor, it's potential reality. The 33 steps are the ladder to this state of being. Anyone can ascend, but no one ascends without decision, without surrender, and without truth. Therefore, if you feel that something within you is ready to go beyond the surface, this video will be your map, a symbolic and practical guide, a progressive revelation of the 33 hidden steps in the life of Jesus. Not so you can admire them, but so you can embody them, because the real miracle is not walking on water, it's walking in this world with firm feet and an awakened heart. The journey to enlightenment does not begin with celestial applause or overwhelming mystical visions. It starts at the rawest, quietest, and often most painful moment of life. That instant where everything that seemed solid begins to crumble. The first step is not spiritual, in the romantic sense of the word. It is destabilizing. It's the collapse of certainties, the breaking away from narratives that kept the identity standing. In the path of Jesus, this manifests early on, a childhood marked by precocious wisdom, but also by isolation, rejection, and the burden of a misunderstood mission. This step is the recognition of dissonance. Something within us starts to perceive that ordinary life is not enough. There is no turning back after this. It is the beginning of the journey. In the first step, we are confronted by the realization that the world we were taught to live in does not accommodate the fullness that the soul yearns for. It is as if the soul awakens from a deep sleep and cries out for air, for meaning. Jesus, even as a young man, already demonstrated a sense of identity greater than social roles when he said, "Don't you know I must be about my Father's business?" Here, the step shows us that spiritual awakening begins with breaking away from blind obedience. Questioning is not rebellion. It is a sacred act. It is at this moment that the individual begins to look inward and question what is outside. Something begins to burn. Something pulses wanting to be born. But this birth requires the abandonment of the comfort of ignorance. The second step is the acceptance of the call, not the one that comes from the heavens in the form of a voice, but the one that vibrates in the heart with a silent urgency. Jesus accepts his mission in silence. He does not chase after notoriety. He goes to the desert. He fasts. He remains silent. This step is one of radical introspection. It is the decision to withdraw from the noise, both external and internal. Here, the individual begins to perceive that the truth will not be found in ready-made answers, but in the deep listening of one's own being. It is the moment where the journey gains intimacy, the soul begins to guide, the mind becomes frightened, and solitude ceases to be absence and becomes communion. The ego resists, but something truer has already begun to lead. The third step involves confronting the shadow. There is no spiritual journey without a confrontation with the inner darkness. Jesus, in the desert, faces temptations that are more than just tests. They are archetypes of the ego: power, vanity, dominance. Each temptation is a part of us that wants to maintain control, that fears surrender. This step shows us that illumination does not come from running away from the shadow, but by integrating it. The spiritual warrior is the one who walks towards what they fear, knowing that the real battle is with themselves. The ego cries out for certainty, the soul feeds on surrender. This is the step of internal conflict, of purification through confrontation, a crossing that few dare to make, but that everyone will inevitably encounter. In the fourth step, the language changes. The seeker begins to understand that silence communicates more than 1,000 words. Jesus, after overcoming temptations, does not preach immediately. He listens, he observes, he moves with precision. This step teaches us that silence is not absence, it is gestation. It is at this stage that the soul begins to separate the true from the illusory. The noise of the mind gives way to the subtle voice of the spirit. The practices of meditation, contemplation, and solitude cease to be exercises. They become states of being. The individual begins to inhabit internal spaces that were previously closed. And there, in that silent space, the first fruits of consciousness begin to sprout. But they are fragile, and they need silence to mature. The fifth step is the practice of presence. True spirituality begins to manifest in everyday gestures. There is no longer a separation between the sacred and the mundane. Jesus did not perform miracles to impress. Each gesture was made in total presence, with full intention. This step is the start of conscious living. Every action becomes a spiritual act. The gaze is purified. The hearing is sanctified. The body becomes a temple, and the present moment, an altar. The mind no longer dominates as before, and the heart begins to lead. From here, the spiritual path ceases to be theory. It becomes embodied life. Everything that was external begins to reflect what is inside, and the world, which was once a stage for struggle, reveals itself as a master and mirror. As one embarks on these first 5 steps, the walker begins to realize that they are not accumulating wisdom. They are emptying themselves. They are leaving behind filters, fears, and constraints. The soul, once stifled, begins to breathe. Spirituality ceases to be a concept and becomes a natural state. But this beginning, although it seems serene, is the most demanding. Because it is here that old foundations are broken. Often this moment is accompanied by crises. Relationships change, purposes unravel, work loses meaning. What is happening is not destruction, it is revelation. The old must die for the new to be born. But this is where many give up, for they feel the pain but do not yet see the light. However, the journey has already begun. These first 5 steps are the foundation of the entire journey of the 33rd. Without them, the rest are not sustainable. They create the inner space where light can dwell. They remove the rubble so that the temple can be erected. And above all, they reveal a profound truth. Enlightenment is not something that is achieved. It is something that is revealed when what we are not is removed. Jesus, at the beginning of his mission, does not start with crowds. He starts in anonymity, in the desert, in the intimate. It is the soul that calls, and the world, no matter how noisy it is, can no longer silence this call. Each step is subtle, yet profound. They are silent ruptures that open internal portals. And once crossed, there is no return. The being starts to reshape from within. You perceive yourself less as an owner and more as an instrument. You begin to see people with more compassion, and the pain of others is no longer distant. The heart begins to expand, And, in this process, consciousness aligns with the original purpose. The initial steps are the foundation of lucid love. A love that does not demand, does not judge, does not beg. It just flows. It's important to remember, there's no rush on this path. Each step has its own time, its own pace, its own season. Impatience is the trap of the ego. Surrender is the secret of the spirit. Jesus lived each stage fully. He didn't rush to the miracle. He walked with presence, even knowing the destination. This teaches us that the true miracle is to remain whole even amidst chaos. What begins as a search transforms into a path, and what seemed external reveals itself as something that was always within. These 5 steps are the silent call to all who feel there is something more, that they were not born to merely survive but to awaken. This is not about doctrine. This is not about religion. It's about inner truth, a movement of the soul towards its home. And this home, contrary to what we might imagine, is not in the sky. It's in the awakened heart, fully inhabiting the present moment. With each step, the journey requires more dedication and more truth. After the first 5 gates of consciousness, the traveler enters a phase of intense inner transformation, where dilemmas no longer come from the outside, but emerge from the deepest layers of the psyche. Here, the seeker is summoned to confront the most crystallized aspects of their ego: pride, vanity, neediness, control. There's no longer any way to hide behind roles. The superficial shine fades and reveals what is truly alive within us. Jesus, when beginning his public mission, had already passed through these internal trials. He was not seeking fame or recognition, just the truth. And it is this same posture that the 6th step demands, a radical renunciation of the need for approval. Now the journey is no longer about pleasing the world, it's about being true to the soul. In the 6th step, the main initiation is learning to lose, not as a failure, but as a purification. The ego, for a long time, guided our actions out of fear of not being enough. It created masks, defenses, strategies. But at this stage, such mechanisms begin to crumble. Pain emerges as a teacher, not as a punishment. The soul, now more awake, begins to illuminate the shadows with compassion, and the ego realizes that it can no longer command the journey. Jesus teaches us this by allowing himself to be rejected by his own, discredited by the doctors of the law, unaccompanied in the crowds. He does not cling to prestige. He remains firm in what he is. This step requires that we learn to be nothing in the world to be everything in essence. True strength is born from vulnerability. The 7th step marks the break with inherited identities. Here, family, cultural, and social roles begin to unravel. It is no longer possible to sustain the image that others project. It is the moment of spiritual depersonalization, not as alienation, but as freedom. Jesus breaks with the expectations of the Pharisees, but also with the illusions of the disciples. He did not come to fit into labels, and neither did we. This step can be painful because it implies saying no to what once defined us. Friends may drift away, relatives may not understand, and old dreams may die. But all of this is part of renewal. Only those who accept to die to what has been can be born again. And it is at this point that the seeker begins to experience the freedom of being without needing to explain. In the 8th step, the emotional wound is touched at its root. This is a sensitive point in the journey, where past traumas, unprocessed pains, and suppressed memories come to the surface, not to punish us, but to be healed. True spirituality does not run from pain. It dives into it with open eyes. Jesus wept for Lazarus, felt deep compassion for others' pain, allowed himself to feel abandonment, rejection, misunderstanding. He shows us that the soul does not need to be invulnerable to be luminous. Healing occurs when we stop fighting what we feel and start loving even the broken parts of ourselves. This step is a return to the heart, a meeting with the wounded child, the misunderstood teenager, the exhausted adult. All of this reintegrates, and the soul becomes home again. The 9th step leads us to the symbolic desert, the space where there are no more distractions, where the soul is left alone with itself. Here, silence becomes a mirror. And it's not always a gentle mirror. The desert is the place where noise ceases so that truth can echo. It's where the soul realizes there's nothing left to do, just to be. This step tests the walker's perseverance. Often they feel abandoned, directionless, without visible reward. But it's in this state of emptiness that the light penetrates. Jesus spent 40 days fasting, confronting his own inner demons, resisting the seduction of false power. He didn't run away from the desert, he inhabited it. And he showed us that it's in the apparent emptiness that the divine presence reveals itself more clearly. Upon crossing this desert, the traveler reaches the 10th step, where faith ceases to be a belief. It becomes living trust. One no longer believes in God. One trusts in Him with their whole being. Here, the surrender is complete. One no longer demands guarantees, nor seeks certainties. The ego, tired of trying to control, finally surrenders. And in this act of surrender, a new power is born. Not one that dominates, but one that flows. Jesus walks on water not as a spectacle, but as a symbol. When there is no longer fear of death, the impossible becomes natural. This step teaches us that faith is not a resource of desperation, but the certainty that even without solid ground, there is direction. The seeker now walks with an open heart. They know they can fall, and yet they trust. It's important to understand that these spiritual trials are not punishments. They are blessings disguised as crises. They are mirrors that reveal where there is still resistance, where love has not yet penetrated. Each pain carried in this stage is, in fact, a call to transformation. Suffering only becomes suffering when we cling to it, but when we go through it with presence, it transmutes into strength. Jesus did not avoid pain, He sanctified it. And in doing so, He left us a model of how to transform suffering into awareness. These 5 steps are like alchemical ovens, burning what is false, purifying what is true. The soul, which has already begun to awaken, now goes through a second birth, more painful, deeper, brighter. Each test is a gateway, and every fall, a lesson. The seeker begins to understand that the spiritual path is not a straight line, but an ascending spiral. We repeat themes, revisit pains, but in each cycle, with more awareness, with more love, with more truth. At this point in the journey, external life may seem disorganized. The old structures no longer hold, but the new ones have not yet arrived. It's the sacred limbo, a space where the soul learns to trust in the invisible. This is where many turn back, out of fear. But those who continue discover that the invisible is not absence, it's the origin. Trust becomes solid ground, and presence, the safest guide. Jesus never had maps. He was led by His attunement with the Father, and it's this same attunement that begins to guide the seeker's steps. At the end of the 10th step, something has already irreversibly changed. The being no longer seeks to be special, it seeks to be real. It no longer wants to shine for others. It desires to serve. Vanity gives way to simplicity, and simplicity becomes beauty. This is the beginning of a new level of consciousness, where the sacred is found in the ordinary, and the miracle reveals itself in breathing. The soul begins to align with the divine rhythm. There is no more rush, there is flow, and where there is flow, there is peace. To traverse steps 6 through 10 is to accept spiritual maturity. It's to move from mystical infancy into the adolescence of the soul, where doubts still persist, but direction is already present, where pain still exists, but so does wisdom, and where light begins to become constant, not as ecstasy, but as a state of being. The journey now is no longer solely personal, it's also collective. The seeker begins to radiate what they live, and the world begins to change, not because they want to transform it, but because they themselves have become a living transformation. Reaching the 11th step is like entering a new level of reality, a place where common knowledge no longer serves, where religious concepts begin to crumble, and where the soul starts to hear a voice that does not come from the world, The wisdom that is born here is not read, learned, or memorized. It is revealed. It does not come from the analytical mind, but from direct contact with the spiritual field that sustains existence. At this stage, the seeker realizes that all profound truth is intuitive, that the greatest answers arrive when one no longer asks, and that silence is, often, more instructive than any sermon. The 11th step invites us to abandon attachment to mental understanding and to dive into the wisdom of presence, where what matters is not what is understood, but what is embodied. Jesus knew this. He didn't debate doctrines, he embodied truths. When he spoke, he used parables, metaphors, symbols. He didn't offer conclusions, but gateways. Each of his sentences was a riddle that could only be deciphered by those willing to listen with their hearts. The 12th step, therefore, teaches us the language of the Spirit, a language that moves by vibration, by attunement, and by pure intent. Here, the seeker begins to realize that the Spirit speaks all the time, but at a frequency different from that which the logical mind captures. The signs are in the encounters, in the dreams, in the symbolic repetitions, in the sudden emotions. The wisdom that is not taught is the one that already resides within us, but was buried by the noises of the personality. At this point, silence ceases to be the absence of sound and becomes a living entity. On the 13th step, the seeker realizes that true listening is not passive, it is active, vibrational, sensitive. Silence becomes an oracle. They start to hear between the lines, to feel what was not said, to capture the most subtle intentions. It is in this space that deep intuitions are born. They are not guesses, they are revelations. Jesus climbed the mountains to pray not because he needed to ask, but because in that space, far from the crowd and the noise, he reconnected with the source. This step shows us that the soul only matures in sacred silence. The noise of the mind needs to be dissolved so that the song of the Spirit can be heard. This is the music of wisdom, inaudible to common ears, but perfectly clear to the awakened heart. With the advancement to the 14th step, something even deeper begins to emerge. The perception of the interconnection of all things. The seeker begins to see unity where they once saw separation. Duality loses its strength. Good and evil reveal themselves as expressions of the same educational game. The other ceases to be a threat and reveals itself as an extension of oneself. At this stage, Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," not as a moral rule, but as a mystical realization. This step is the activation of the Christ-like vision, seeing the divine spark in everything, even in pain, in error, and in the adversary. This does not mean being complicit with evil, but understanding that every soul, in its essence, seeks to return to the light, even when lost in the shadows. This understanding cannot be taught. It only arises from the fusion with the whole. In the 15th step, the seeker begins to dissolve into the flow of life. Mental rigidity transforms into spiritual flexibility. There is no longer resistance, there is alignment. It's as if, all of a sudden, life as a whole begins to make sense. Past pains, encounters, breakups, cycles, everything fits together like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. Jesus spoke of being in the Father and the Father in him. This is not a metaphor for the religious, it's an experience for the initiate. In this step, the seeker begins to live in tune with the divine rhythm, with the cosmic dance. He no longer forces events, does not manipulate, does not beg. He allows. He cooperates with the flow of the sacred, and in this state of cooperation, miracles become natural, and peace becomes constant. But this kind of wisdom cannot be stored. It is not knowledge, it is transformation. The being who reaches this point no longer seeks to know more. They seek to be more. Learning is not cumulative, it is emptying. The soul begins to undress, and in this undressing reveals its essence. What remains is what is eternal. What falls away is what was transient. This wisdom cannot be taught in courses nor passed on in books. It can only be lived, felt, vibrated. It is a presence that changes the frequency of the environment. It is a silence that speaks louder than any voice. It is the truth that can only be known by those who are willing to disappear as I, to be born as we. At this point in the journey, the seeker no longer defines himself by the past, nor projects himself into the future. He just is. And this being is enough. Anxiety dissolves because there is nothing more to prove. Fear disappears because there is no more separation. Suffering loses strength because there is no resistance left. Everything that happens is perceived as part of the divine work. Even pain becomes sacred because it reveals where separation still exists. Jesus lived this state so profoundly that he could love even his executioners. This is not weakness, it's pure power. The power to transcend the ego and be an unconditional channel of love. This is not learned, it is awakened, and every step lived in fullness leads us to this point. It's important to say that wisdom that is not taught is only received by those who have already been through the fire. Those who still seek shortcuts, formulas, or recognition cannot access it, not as a punishment, but due to a lack of attunement. It's like trying to listen to a symphony with a poorly tuned radio. The frequency of higher wisdom demands purity of intention, openness of heart, and humility of spirit. It is simple. Therefore, it is invisible to the prideful eyes. But for those who have silenced enough, it reveals itself in the details, in the breeze, in a glance, in a gesture of tenderness, and it transforms everything. Not by the content it brings, but by the presence it carries. At this point in the journey, the soul begins to inhabit two worlds at the same time, the visible and the invisible. It operates in the common world, but with superior awareness. It speaks with words, but transmits vibration. It acts in time, but tunes into the eternal. This is the beginning of Christ-like wisdom, the consciousness that doesn't need to dominate anything to manifest everything, the presence that doesn't demand anything but reveals everything, and it is in this presence that the seeker becomes a master, not in the sense of someone who teaches, but of someone who embodies the truth, and this in itself is the greatest teaching possible. When Jesus said, "Those who have eyes to see, let them see," he was not talking about physical vision, but spiritual perception. The wisdom that is not taught is this: that which can only be received by those willing to see beyond the visible, hear beyond the audible, and feel beyond the emotional. It's not about blind faith, it's about awakened perception, and only those who accept to die to the known awaken. The soul now lives in another time, at another pace. It no longer chases life, it lives from life, and it becomes an extension of the divine in everything it does. At the end of these 5 steps, the seeker is no longer the same. Not because they learned more, but because they let go more. They no longer carry theories, they carry presence. They no longer seek explanations, they live revelations. They no longer want to convince, they want to live in truth. And it is this silent, loving, and present experience that begins to transform everything around. Because true wisdom, when embodied, spreads like perfume, silent but unmistakable. Reaching the 16th step is crossing the invisible boundary between who you thought you were and who you really are. Up to this point, the path has been filled with breaks, revelations, and purifications, but now it's no longer about understanding nor transforming, it's about dying. Not physically, but energetically, identity-wise. The ego, this psychological center that always tried to control everything, begins to be dissolved from within, not by violence, but by surrender. The 16th step is the beginning of the dark night of the soul, the place where the seeker feels utterly alone, disoriented, and paradoxically, closer to God than ever before. It's when the light seems to have gone out that the inner glow begins to be born. Jesus lives this moment in Gethsemane, sweating blood, pleading for the cup to be taken away, but then fully surrendering to the Father's will. This step is brutal because it teaches us to give up what we love the most, the very control of life. In the 17th step, the soul enters a state of radical emptiness. It is the complete emptying of the old structure. There is no more familiar ground nor image of the future. What once made sense now seems distant, and what once brought security dissolves. The seeker no longer recognizes himself, but it is at this exact point that the true identity begins to be born. Jesus, upon being arrested, does not resist. He surrenders. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. He understands that light only comes when there is no more struggle against the shadow. This step teaches us that deep suffering, when accepted with consciousness, becomes a gateway to rebirth. It's not about enduring the pain. It's about allowing it to transform us. In the silence of this emptiness, a living presence is born, a serenity that does not come from understanding, but from surrendering. And it is at this point that the old self dies with honor, allowing the emergence of the real being. The 18th step is the crossing of spiritual identity. It's when the soul, already stripped of attachments, ideas, images, dogmas, and roles, begins to experience the vastness of being. Not as a concept, but as a direct experience. It is the birth of the inner Christ. Jesus knew this when, even crucified, he still offered compassion. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." He did not react, he transcended. This step demands more than faith. It requires absolute existential truth. Here, one no longer lives according to what the world expects. One lives from an unshakable core, a silence filled with wisdom. The soul becomes a receptacle of the divine. One no longer speaks of God. One becomes a dwelling of God. It is the rebirth of the Christ consciousness within the human, the fusion of opposites, the revelation that everything we sought outside always lived within. In the 19th step, the heart becomes the new center of existence. The mind quiets, the body purifies, and the heart expands to levels never before experienced. Compassion is no longer an ethical choice. It is a natural state. One does not choose to love. One loves because one is love. Jesus, even in the face of the cruelest suffering, does not harden. He remains open, pure, vibrant. He transcends death without needing to escape from it. This step is the consecration of the spirit over matter. Love now is no longer a feeling, it is substance, it is presence, it is a field. The seeker becomes a healing presence. Their mere existence transforms, not because they speak beautifully, nor because they teach something new, but because they radiate. Presence no longer seeks to convince, it transforms through resonance. Finally, the 20th step seals the alchemy. It is the moment where the seeker, now empty of self, is filled with God, full of essence, full of life. But contrary to what many imagine, this fulfillment does not come as a permanent ecstasy. It comes as constant peace, a state where everything is accepted, understood, integrated, where the world still continues with its noises, but it no longer affects as before. What was once a crisis is now a learning experience. What was once a loss is now a release. What was once death is now a rebirth. The 20th step is the point where the eternal identity takes command of everyday life. And this changes everything. Relationships, work, spirituality, everything aligns. The seeker now lives not to find the truth, but to be an instrument of the truth. Jesus resurrects, not just as a supernatural event, but as a symbol of a being who has overcome separation and become one with the all. These 5 steps form the core of spiritual transfiguration. There is no way to pass through this gateway without pain, without loss, without profound silence. But neither is there a way to emerge from it without freedom, without light, without truth. The soul that crosses this symbolic death is no longer hostage to the world. It becomes an ambassador of light, walking with humility but with unshakable inner authority. Because whoever has already died to themselves fears nothing anymore, and whoever has already touched the eternal no longer loses themselves in the transitory. This stage of the journey is so intimate that it cannot be fully expressed in words. Each seeker will experience it in a unique way, but the signs are universal. The stripping away, the emptying, the silence, and finally, the birth of a new frequency. A frequency that heals through presence, that calms with a glance, that awakens through simplicity. It is not a spiritual persona. It is an awakened, real, effortless being. This is the true birth of the inner Christ. a being that serves life with a clean heart and a peaceful soul. Jesus gave us this model not for us to admire, but for us to live. The cross is a symbol of the death of the ego. The resurrection is a symbol of the victory of consciousness. And each of us has this inner cross. Each one is called to this rebirth, not to become special, but to remember who they have always been. This is the gift that Step 20 gives us. The quiet power to live fully, in tune with eternity, even amidst the chaos of time. At the end of these 5 steps, the seeker no longer strides towards evolution. He strides towards service. He no longer seeks to ascend. He descends with humility into the world to elevate others with his presence. This is the true miracle. Not walking on water, but walking among men with an awakened heart and eyes full of compassion. And in this state, the new being no longer seeks God. He lives as a living conduit of Him, in every gesture, in every silence, in every breath. On the 21st step, something grand happens. The consciousness that has crossed the symbolic death of the ego begins to pulse in unison with absolute love. This love is not human, it's not romantic, it's not conditional. It does not rely on affinity, reciprocity, or understanding. It simply is. And it's at this point that the seeker stops loving because they want to be loved, and starts loving because they recognize in everything and everyone the same divine principle that burns in their chest. This step is a milestone. It's when the heart's energy expands beyond personal identity and begins to touch everything that exists. Jesus experienced this radical expansion by extending love even to His tormentors, even to the forgotten ones, even to those whom nobody saw. He didn't love for merit. He loved by nature. This step invites us to live exactly that. To be love that does not choose, does not calculate, does not wait. It simply radiates. The 22nd step is when the seeker begins to understand that serving is not a function. It's a natural consequence of those who inhabit the vibration of the divine. It's no longer about helping others as a moral goal or ethical task. It's about seeing oneself in the other, and upon seeing the suffering of others, feeling as if it is one's own body being touched, one's own soul being called. Compassion, here, ceases to be a noble emotion and becomes a spiritual intelligence, an ability to act from the heart without judgment, without superiority, without imposition. Jesus washed the disciples' feet not to teach humility with words, but to demonstrate in practice that no one who is awake places themselves above anyone else. This step teaches us that to serve is to reign in the kingdom of the Spirit. It is to touch the earth with heavenly hands, to heal with the eyes, to welcome with silence. On the 23rd step, the seeker begins to live in a state of medicinal presence. Their mere existence transforms environments, soothes hearts, and dissolves tensions, not because they say beautiful things or act in a spiritually correct way, but because their vibration is coherent with the source. This step shows us that the energy of conscious love heals, and it doesn't just heal psychological or emotional wounds, but also ancestral traumas, collective pains, and inherited spiritual tensions. The soul, now aligned, becomes a channel for transmitting an invisible force that operates on the deepest levels of reality. When Jesus touched someone, or simply allowed himself to be touched, there was no ritual. There was a direct connection with the essence. Healing occurred because his presence was pure, whole, and loving. This step is the awakening of the Christic medicine within us. Upon crossing the 24th step, love becomes universal. It's not just about loving your neighbor anymore, it's about loving existence itself. You love the sun, the wind, the rain, the animals, the cycles, the impermanence. You love what is and what was. Even mistakes become sacred because they reveal a path. Even pain earns reverence because it shapes compassion. This cosmic love is what Jesus manifests when he states, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." He's not just talking about action, he's talking about a new lens of perception of reality. When the heart becomes the organ of spiritual vision, the whole world is seen as a temple. The seeker now lives in reverence, and every gesture is a prayer. Love at this stage is not selective. It includes, integrates, welcomes, transforms, expands. The 25th step, is the consecration of the mission. Here, the awakened seeker understands that their body, voice, mind, and time are sacred instruments at the service of the divine plan. It's no longer about doing good deeds or living correctly. It's about embodying love as a lifestyle, as a living atmosphere, as a constant presence. Jesus had no personal ambition. Everything in him was directed towards the Father's will, that is, the loving cosmic intelligence that governs the universe. This step is a silent pact with the whole. It does not need to be spoken, sworn, or published, but it is deeply felt as an inner alliance, to live to serve, to love to heal, to exist to radiate. This consciousness, when matured, awakens the true purpose of the soul, no longer as a task to be discovered, but as a light that has always been there, just waiting for space to ignite. This set of steps marks the point at which the seeker becomes a silent agent of collective healing. They no longer need titles, validations, or recognition. They operate in the subtleties of existence. They are the pause in the chaos, the calm gaze in the turmoil, the gentle word in the conflict, the wise action in the face of fear. They no longer serve the world out of a need for meaning. They serve because they have become a channel of life itself. And life, when it flows through someone without resistance, can only act with love, compassion, and wisdom. This awakened being begins to change social, familial, and energetic patterns simply by the way they vibrate. They become what the ancients referred to as the living presence of the Holy Spirit. At this point in the journey, spiritual gifts begin to manifest. But contrary to what one might think, they do not come as superpowers. They come as humble tools in the service of love. One may have the gift of healing, of listening, of speech, of inner vision, of inspiration. But all of this is kept secret, in silence, in reverence. The seeker does not boast because they know they are not the author of anything. They are merely a bridge, a harp where the divine plays its music, and the music that it plays, wherever it reaches, reminds everyone that they too are part of the whole. They too are worthy of love. They too are extensions of the light. Jesus embodies this ideal of an expanded heart in every detail. He did not exclude anyone. He touched lepers, ate with sinners, welcomed rejected women, conversed with foreigners. He did not preach to the saints. He reminded the lost that they were saints who had forgotten themselves. This is the call of the 25th step, to go where no one wants to go, to love who no one wants to love, to touch where the world says it's dangerous, not out of heroism, but because there is no longer a separation between me and the other, because love, here, has no more borders. It is an ocean without shores. This universal love, when embodied, transforms everything, and it doesn't need a fuss. It works in the unseen. It heals without needing the spotlight. It builds without raising flags. It radiates without seeking applause. This is the true spiritual strength, the power that doesn't need power, because it's already love in action. The soul that has arrived here no longer wishes to change the world. It wishes to be a new world in every gesture, because it has understood that the external world has always been a reflection of the internal world, and that the only real revolution is the one that is born in the awakened heart of a being who has decided not to hurt anymore, not to judge anymore, not to separate anymore, only to love. The conclusion of these 5 steps is a filled silence, a state of soul where everything rests. The body vibrates lightly. The gaze becomes vast. Time slows down. Life becomes sacred even in the trivial. And everything is seen with gratitude, not as a spiritual obligation, but as a natural state of those who have recognized the grace of existence. The soul now dances with life. And this dance is music for those who are still seeking their rhythm. Such a being doesn't need to say they love. Just being present is enough. And love manifests itself as an atmosphere around them. The 26th step initiates the entry into the portals of enlightenment. Here, the seeker no longer walks by effort, does not ascend by discipline, does not seek out of a desire for transcendence. Now, they are guided by an invisible, loving, and silent force that operates from within, dissolving the last veils that upheld the illusion of separation. At this stage, Reality is no longer perceived as an external object, but as an extension of the field of consciousness that inhabits and permeates all things. Jesus lived in this state when he said, "I and the Father are one." He did not speak metaphorically, but as a direct observation, the result of a state of presence where the human mind and the divine mind become a single integrated perception. In this step, psychological time begins to lose its relevance. The past no longer binds, the future no longer generates anxiety, and the now reveals itself as living eternity. On the 27th step, the dissolution of the self reaches its deepest point. Personal identity, once central, begins to evaporate like a soap bubble in the sun, not because the human is denied, but because the human is understood as a transitory reflection of the infinite. In this state, the seeker no longer says, "I am this or that." He realizes that he is the emptiness where everything happens, the silent space where all forms arise and disappear. This is the awakening of non-dual consciousness, where the observer, the observed, and the act of observing become one. Jesus manifested this by healing without technique, touching without judgment, speaking with authority without worldly authority. He did not act from a self. He allowed the Father to act through him. At this step, enlightenment is no longer a goal. It is a natural state, and the seeker begins to live as a pure witness of grace without attachment to role, story, or outcome. The 28th step is marked by the direct experience of what mystics call the state of unification. Here, the heart and mind merge, the body becomes an extension of the soul, and the entire universe is perceived as the body of God itself. There is no more inside and outside. There is no more sacred and profane. Everything is one. Everything is expression. The seeker becomes absolutely intimate with creation. He feels the suffering of the world as his own, but also feels the beauty of the world as his own light. He contemplates the sunrise as a revelation, listens to silence as a hymn, breathes as if praying, and prays as if breathing. Each gesture carries the infinite. Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Here it is understood. It is not about belief, but about direct perception, undeniable, incommunicable, and deeply transformative. At this point, the awakened being is no longer within spirituality. They have become living spirituality. Meditation is no longer a practice. It's the natural state. Presence is no longer an exercise. It's the constant internal environment. There's no longer a desire to know, because it's realized that true knowledge is not knowing. There's no longer a need to act, because action arises spontaneously, according to the rhythm of Tao, of spirit, of source. This is the point where the soul discovers the power of non-interference, to act without forcing, to speak without noise, to move without hurry, to be without needing a name. Life energy flows through the seeker with lightness and strength at the same time. It's what the masters call the point where the soul dances with God without defined steps, just attunement. The 29th step, the last before complete fusion with the One, is the total integration of the world and the spirit. It is when enlightenment, previously felt as a state of ecstasy or quietude, becomes fully lived in action, in everyday life, in matter. Here, the seeker no longer needs to isolate themselves in mountains or deserts to preserve peace. They carry the desert in their heart and the mountain in their breath. They walk among men as veiled light, as an awakened presence, as a witness to the eternal in time. Their decisions flow with wisdom, their words touch where nothing else could, and their silence speaks what no human voice is capable of saying. They no longer live for themselves, but they also do not live against themselves. They simply live as a full expression of the truth. Jesus, upon returning after the resurrection, was no longer recognized, not by appearance, but because his vibration was different. He had transcended the world, and for that reason, he could touch it with real freedom. This stage of the journey is indescribable with accuracy. Words merely scratch the surface of the mystery that surrounds this state. But all mystics, in every tradition, report the same essential core: absence of separation, fullness of love, effortless wisdom, and egoless action. This being no longer feels in the world. It feels like a world aware of itself. It perceives that the sun does not rise, it is the light. That the water does not flow, it is the flow. That the trees do not grow, it is the root. And that the eyes it uses to see are the same eyes that God uses to behold creation. This is not delusion, it's the pinnacle of spiritual sanity, a state where everything rests in itself, where everything lives as the dance of being. From this point forward, the journey does not end, it becomes eternal. The seeker is no longer someone walking towards the light. He is the light itself, gently walking among men, revealing that the light was never distant, only veiled by fear and ego. He no longer needs masters, but honors all who came before. He no longer needs techniques, but respects all practices. He no longer seeks to belong, because he already belongs to the whole. His presence heals, not because he tries, but because he is. His word awakens, not because he teaches, but because it resonates. His life becomes a living gospel, not written on paper, but engraved in the hearts of those who cross his path. Jesus reached this point. He lived as a man, cried as a human, suffered like anyone else, but died to all of this without denying anything. And in resurrecting, he showed us that the spirit within us is greater than time, than fear, than death. These final steps are not for the perfect, they are for the wholesome. They are not for the idealized saints. They are for humans willing to completely empty themselves of illusion to allow the divine to dance through them. True enlightenment is simple, unpretentious, quiet, but it is irreversible. Arriving here is to recognize that the search has always been the journey itself, leading back home. That the map was within. That the 33 steps are not stairs to climb, but layers to be peeled away until only the naked, pure, brilliant, eternal self remains. And that's why step 29 concludes with the greatest gift of all, peace that does not depend on the world, because it comes from the one who has become the world in peace. The 30th step marks the beginning of the final crossing, not because the path is coming to an end, but because the being that was walking completely dissolves into what it has always been. Here, there are no more steps in the common sense. There is no longer someone who seeks, who desires, who interprets. What remains is a pure state of being, so vast, so quiet, and so absolute, that the very idea of an I no longer makes sense. The seeker at this point crosses the subtlest veil of existence, the illusion of separation between the enlightened and the world. He realizes that there are no more steps to climb, because the summit has disappeared, revealing that there was never a mountain. Everything has always been the infinite field of presence. It is at this moment that Jesus surrenders his spirit on the cross, not as a surrender to suffering, but as the culmination of total surrender. He dissolves his last resistance. He does not die, he transcends. The 30th step is the crossing from form to essence, from effort to fluidity, from name to silence. Here, the soul no longer seeks to understand. It rests. At this stage, time disintegrates, space bends. The body becomes a living score of invisible frequencies. The mind no longer thinks, it bends. The heart not only feels, it emanates. Existence is no longer an experience, it's an extension of consciousness. The enlightened being traverses the world with the serenity of someone who knows that everything is exactly as it should be. There are no more internal conflicts, no spiritual pursuits, no urgency for expansion. The light now rests within them as a permanent dwelling, and their presence is so clear that it becomes invisible. They don't need to be noticed. They don't wish to be recognized. They merely live, and in living, they manifest the perfection of the eternal now. This step requires the abandonment of the last fragment of identity, that of the one who imagines themselves awake. Here, even enlightenment dies, because there is no longer anyone to enlighten. There is only light. Step 31 is the ultimate surrender, not the surrender of the body or the mind, but of the soul itself. It is the fusion of the individual being with the absolute ocean of reality. Jesus expresses this surrender in his last words on the cross. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. There is no more I. There is no more personal plan. There is no more fear of ceasing to exist. There is only the radical acceptance of dissolution. This step is the pinnacle of spiritual trust. It is when the seeker understands, with every cell, that nothing belongs to him, not even life, that everything is an expression of the source, and the only thing to do is to allow life to be lived through him, without resistance, without control, without separation. It is here that the true miracle is born, not the one of walking on water, but of floating on existence with peace, even amidst the storms. The cross, in this context, is the altar of fusion. The soul passes through the final agony of the ego and emerges into the serenity of eternity. At this stage, breathing becomes sacred. Each movement is a ritual. The spoken word, when uttered, comes laden with silence. The gaze, even when still, conveys revelations. There is no more rush, nor pause. Everything happens with loving precision. The surrender is so profound that the body itself becomes light, and even pain is welcomed as a teacher. The being living this state no longer needs to meditate to achieve peace. They breathe peace. They no longer need to love to feel connection. They are the bridge between everything and everyone. They walk among people like a breath of the divine, gentle, unnoticed, but absolutely transformative. This step transforms presence into continuous prayer. There is no longer a need for spiritual effort. Everything is spiritual. Matter becomes spiritualized. Spirit becomes materialized. The union is consummated. In step 32, the crossing has already been made. What remains is pure manifestation. The body lives as an extension of the spirit. Actions do not stem from mental decisions, but from alignment with the universal flow. The being no longer fears the world, for it has understood that the world is a dream of the absolute, a dance of consciousness. This step is the dwelling of the non-self, a state of total freedom. Freedom from oneself, from others, from roles, from stories, from missions. Here there are no more teachings, only presence. There is no longer a path, only being. Jesus resurrects, not as a return to life, but as transcendence of the cycle. He does not return, he reveals that he never left. He appears and disappears with the naturalness of one who is no longer bound to space. This step is the revelation that the true self was never born, never died, always was. It is the self-essence, the self-silence, the self-everything. From this point on, the soul no longer wishes to understand, nor express, nor impact. It becomes silently fruitful. Its vibration creates transformation. Its stillness generates awakening. It does not concern itself with being understood, because its only concern, if there is still one, is to be coherent with the source. Coherence here is not between words and actions, but between essence and existence. The soul has become a pure reflection of light. The gestures are impeccable not because of moral rigidity, but because they emanate from an incorruptible frequency. The choices are simple, but full of truth. Every moment is lived with the totality of one who knows that everything passes, but the presence never changes. This step is the seal of the path. The being returns to the world, but the world no longer binds him. He acts, but does not cling. He loves, but does not possess. He teaches, but does not assert himself. He lives, and that is enough. Here, the notion of mission dissolves, not because the mission has ended, but because it has been transcended. Life itself has become the mission. Every heartbeat, every breath, every pause, all are part of the grander plan. There is no more hierarchy between the spiritual and the mundane, between the noble and the common. Everything is light. Everything is an expression of the infinite. The seeker, now fully awakened, is a direct channel of the love intelligence that governs the cosmos. There are no more questions. There are no more answers. There is only a vast, deep, silent, and sweet being. Nothing needs to be said, but everything is revealed. Nothing needs to be done, but everything transforms. This step is the ultimate unification. Heaven and earth meet in the chest of the one who has crossed the 32 gates and, in the end, understood that all he was seeking was always himself. Not the ego, not the character, but the eternal being before form, beyond form, inhabiting everything, in everything, as everything. This step is the antechamber of conclusion, a gateway where time bends in reverence and the eternal manifests in every breath. The seeker becomes a convergence point between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the divine, between matter and spirit. He no longer asks why, he lives the how. The suffering of others still touches him, but does not bind him. The world's pain still sensitizes him, but does not paralyze him. He acts as a healer of the soul, but without a scalpel, as a builder of peace, but without tools, as a living presence of the infinite, even amidst the finite. This is the silent gift of Step 32, to make the body an altar, life an offering, and existence a celebration of the mystery. There is no longer a search, there is presence. There is no longer haste, there is eternity. And in this state, the being is ready for the final step, the one that does not end, but dissolves everything into what it has always been. The 33rd step is not an ending. It is the point of dissolution of the idea of an end. Here, everything that was sought is revealed as unnecessary. Everything that was faced, understood, healed, and integrated becomes the backdrop for a state where there is no longer a separation between inner and outer life, between divine and mundane, between serving and being. The 33rd step is the merging of the spirit with reality, the moment when the awakened being returns to the world, not as a prophet or leader, but as a silent channel of eternity. Jesus manifests this step after the resurrection, not to prove his divinity, but to express the total integration of the human with the eternal. He appears without announcing, acts without noise, instructs with few words, and disappears without clinging. This step represents the full awareness that enlightenment is not a personal achievement, but a return to what we have always been, before any name, form, or story. In this state, the seeker understands that the journey has always been a dance of consciousness with itself. All the steps, all the conflicts, all the deaths and rebirths were just echoes of the eternal returning to itself. And now, fully awake, the being no longer feels the need to seek or to teach. He lives. And this life is the teaching itself, not as a discourse, but as a vibration. Words become scarce because there is nothing left to explain. Actions become gentle because there is no more rush. The body moves like an instrument tuned with the music of creation. Silence becomes a fertile field where love sprouts spontaneously. Here, the heart no longer needs to be protected. It is the open temple, the living altar, where light offers itself without resistance. This step is the birth of the true master, the one who no longer teaches with gestures or speeches, but with his very presence. The illumination at this point is not a light that blinds or imposes itself. It is a gentleness that penetrates effortlessly, a clarity that does not need to prove its existence. The awakened being walks among men as an equal, but carries within a peace so profound that it modifies everything around. He no longer seeks to change the world. He understood that the world changes by resonance, and that his role is simply to be the clearest possible reflection of the source. Everything he touches with reverence. Everything he hears with the soul. And everything he does without expecting anything in return. At this step, existence becomes an offering. Every breath is a silent yes to the mystery. Every heartbeat is an echo of universal love. And life, which was once a journey, is now pure contemplation. There is no more intention. There is only surrender. Jesus, after his ascension, no longer presents himself as a religious figure. He manifests as a principle, as a field, as a vibrational consciousness available to all who tap into this frequency. The 33rd step reveals this. True enlightenment does not separate, does not create spiritual castes, does not demand holiness. It includes everything, welcomes everything, transforms everything through the gentleness of the gaze. The world may still see chaos, but the awakened one sees unity. Others may react, but he remains in the center where nothing is lost and everything is recycled into light. He no longer tries to explain God. He lives as an extension of him. And because he has become a clean mirror, love recognizes itself in him. He does not say, "I am God," out of vanity. He recognizes that everything is God, including the one who thinks he is not. This last step is also the quietest. It does not announce itself. It needs no ceremony. It happens like the morning that dawns without fanfare, like the breeze that enters through the window. There is no more ecstasy, because there is no more expectation. What there is a state of deep rest, a silent contentment, an irreversible intimacy with what is. Time is no longer measured in hours, but in vibrations. Space is no longer seen as separation, but as an extension of consciousness itself. The body is no longer a prison, nor a vehicle. It is a temple and home of the presence. This step is the consecration of the being as light in human form. And for that reason, it does not exclude itself from the world. It returns to the world, not as one who returns to a lower place, but as one who comes back to serve, with humility, wherever called. The enlightened soul, upon arriving here, understands that the suffering of the world does not need to be carried, but rather embraced, illuminated, redefined. It no longer carries pains as a cross, but offers them as seeds of compassion. It listens without haste, embraces without fear, speaks without vanity, and acts with precision, not to correct, but to collaborate with the flow of life. It no longer cares about the result. What matters is the vibrational coherence of each gesture, and that changes everything, because its presence, even in silence, reorganizes the field around it. It's not magic, it's harmony. It is now like the air, invisible, essential, silently vital. True enlightenment does not erect thrones. It lowers its gaze and sees God in the eyes of another. Step 33, therefore, is a return to the starting point, but now with the eyes of the soul wide open. The seeker returns to the same world, but with a perspective that will never be the same. They still walk, still eat, still interact, but everything is experienced with a different texture, a different flavor, a different depth. What was once a problem becomes an invitation. What was once an obstacle becomes an initiation. What was once a person becomes a portal. Nothing is trivial, everything is sacred, and they no longer need to remember this, because they have become this. The final step is not the end of a line, it's the dissolution of the line, the disappearance of the map, the total fusion with the terrain. And here, for the first time, they understand. The map never existed. The map was them. The journey was them. The light they sought, it was always them. And because he now knows this, he doesn't boast. He serves. He cares. He shares. Not as a moral obligation, but as a natural impulse of the awakened soul. Enlightenment didn't make him special. It made him ordinary, but with a sparkle in his eyes and silence in his chest. He lives without needing to be seen, and therefore, he is seen by those who have also awakened their inner sight. He no longer carries names, nor dogmas, nor labels. He carries presence, and his presence opens paths, heals environments, dissolves conflicts, not because he tries, but because he is. This is the true end of the path, the reminder that there was never a path. There was only a call to truth, and he answered. And having answered, he now walks without seeking, lives without fearing, loves without measuring, and shines without showing off. Step 33 is the silent inheritance of all masters, prophets, sages, and anonymous beings who traversed darkness and returned as beacons. It's the vibration of Francis of Assisi walking among the poor with gentleness. It's the calm of Buddha sitting under the tree. It's the gaze of Yeshua upon Mary Magdalene. It's the sigh of Rumi dancing in the desert. It's the breath of the elder who, without words, reveals everything. It's the touch of the grandmother who caresses a child's face and, unknowingly, transmits millennia of wisdom. It's the gesture of someone offering their bread to another, and in this gesture ignites a sun in the midst of winter. It's the light that never goes out because it was never lit. It's the being that knows itself to be eternal and therefore lives the present as an altar. This step cannot be explained, it can only be experienced. It is the seed and the fruit, the emptiness and the fullness, the crossing and the arrival, the cross and the sky, the tear and the smile, the silent yes to life as it is, And in this yes, the entire universe bows, not to worship the awakened being, but to recognize it as an inseparable part of itself. The total awakening is this: remembering that we were never out, we were never less, we were never separated. We have always been a unique, irreplaceable, and perfect expression of the source that pulses in everything. And for this reason, the enlightened one returns to the world with clear eyes, firm feet, and a surrendered heart, to live as a living witness of the truth that cannot be spoken, but can be felt, touched, and shared in silence. Now that you've crossed the mystery of step 33, tell me honestly, which moment of this journey touched your soul the most? If you felt the call of the light, even if for an instant, share it in the comments. Your voice, your story, your awakening. All of this is part of the field we are building together. Let's express this awareness in unity. We're not just here to watch, we're here to remind each other of what we've always been. Each comment carries a vibration, and this vibration spreads. How about leaving a sentence below that summarizes what it means to you to live from step 33? And if you feel that this journey still pulses within you, click now on the video that is appearing on your screen. The Brotherhood of Light, the secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased. There we continue. We go deeper. We go beyond what we have been told. Let's enter the Brotherhood of Light, the one that never dimmed, it was only silenced. Because we, mind unfettered, did not come just to learn. We came to remember who we are. See you there, with all the love.